Hey guys, in this video, let's look at how we can actually convert this complicated contour mesh into a single surface and subdivide them and try to project some blocks out of it. Okay, so if you look at this contour mesh, you'll see it is highly detailed contour mesh. Okay, let's begin. Okay, now this is a very detailed contour mesh. Let me put bifocal so you can see what components are being used. Okay, so let's try to get the mesh edges basically. So let's do mesh edges. So this will give you a boundary and the internal lines. So if you put a curve, you see here, so it gives you the boundary. Okay, and if you connect this, then you will get the internal lines. So these are like triangulated mesh. Okay, so what we will do, let's try to get the center first. So that's the center of the mesh. Okay, so what we can do is basically let's try to create a series of lines that will get you the profiles of the entire contour. So basically it is like this. Let's say this is the mesh. Okay, let's create a series of sections that gives you profile of that particular contour at that particular section. Like say for example, if this is one profile, maybe that is here for example, and let's say this is another one. So it gives you profile. Then you will loft the surface between those curves. Okay, so to do that, let's put the plane. Okay, so basically the plane is actually x and z plane. Okay, and then move the plane to the center, so it moves to the center point. So now we need to run the series of planes across this. Let's any direction. Let's look at this direction. Let's say starting from here to here. So if you pick this point, so let's put endpoints and see, oh, there are so many endpoints and starting points of each line. So what we can do, let's do one thing. Let's try to divide this entire boundary curve. Okay, it is actually dividing the boundary curve into 10 numbers. Let's keep it one number. Let's not divide it any further. So this way it will give you points. Okay, now let's put the number here. So type point list. Okay, so and give the size of the font. Okay, so it's zeros and ones. Let's flatten this. Okay, there are duplicates. So now let's cull the duplicates. So put cull duplicates and then now connect here. Now, so this point is actually 213. So let's say if you extract 213, so let's go for item, list item. Okay, feed these points and let's pick 213. So let's give a panel with 213. Okay, so it picked that point. Now if you move your plane to this point, let's put a point. Now if you move this plane to this point, so now we will move this whole plane all the way across to the other edge. Okay, so it is basically, let's put a series. Okay, so let's give a number as 100. Maybe let's say 100 counts. So it will put 100 planes across. And numbers later, let's say 2. So between each of the planes, it will put 2 units as a gap. So now let's move the plane. So now we need to know the vector. So it's basically y direction. So move this. So it is actually, we need to go negative. Okay, so it's basically connected all the points. Now since we have put 100, the 2 as a gap, so it went all the way there. So if you keep 1 unit, maybe let's keep it as maybe 110. Okay, so basically these are 110 planes that fits in within the edge of the mesh. Okay, and now let's create the mesh plane component. So connect the mesh here and connect the planes here. See, it has actually created these sectional lines which follows the topography of the mesh. So now if you come here and increase the plane, increase the distance between the plane, so it will automatically create a number of sections. So let's do one more thing. Now if you increase here, the number of planes are actually going beyond the boundary, which we don't want to. So we want to keep it within the mesh boundary. So let's create a division component. So every time you change here, automatically number of planes, a number of lines will be within the boundary. Okay, so let's rebuild the curve, connect the curve to here. Now give the degree, let's say 4, and give the number, let's say 100. Basically this is the resolution. And now let's increase the number to 300. You see it's smooth. Now if you go and pull in the internal lines from the original mesh, from the mesh edges, you see here these are triangulated mesh. So if you look at these curves and the mesh lines, you see it is actually pretty much following the same. You can actually do another thing. You can actually create NURBS curve. So for that we need to have let's divide the curve, give some, let's say 300 points. So each of the sectional lines will be divided into 300 units. Let's create a NURBS component. Let's connect the vertices. See, it has created a very nice smooth curve. See, it is very smooth. Now we can actually go ahead and loft. Actually let's try to look at two options. Let's loft the rebuild curve. Okay, let's switch off this mesh. Now let's flatten this. See, it has actually created. So if you increase the division, the surfaces will start to readjust by itself based on number of profiles it is creating. Let's create the same loft using NURBS curve. Okay, so let's go to the NURBS curve, flatten this. You see it is much more smoother. Now let's subdivide this. Okay, let's go for isotrim. It requires a domain and a surface. Okay, so let's divide the domain. Okay, feed the domain from here, feed the surface. These are the two surfaces. So basically it is created by default 10 by 10 grid. Okay, let's create a slider 10. Okay, so if you look at here, so this is actually, it has become one surface with 10 subdivisions in it. So if you control here number of divisions, you can actually do that. Now what we will do, let's try to offset each of these square following along the curve. So to do that, we need to find the center point of each of these squares. So this is the center point. Basically this is a tentative center point. It is not exactly the center point because the curve, it's a very curvy surface. So let's try to find the closest point. So surface closest point, connect the center point to the point and surface here. So basically if you zoom in here, this is the center point and that's the surface center point. Now let's evaluate the surface. So it gives you UV points connected to UV and then to the surface. So now this gives you couple of outputs, points, normals, UV and frames. So each one of them is facing its own normals. So anything you put in here, for example, let's try to scale the rectangle, scale each square. So let's connect, that's this subdivision. Okay, so we are scaling it. Now it needs to pick the center point. So let's connect the point here. See, that's it. Now factor, basically let's say 0.55. So if you increase the factor, it will go ahead. So let's preview it off. Let's keep only this surface on. Now if you extrude these geometries, and the direction is basically Z direction. Okay, now let's give, let's say 5 points. It has actually created 5 points vertically. So it is basically projecting from those lines vertically up. And in some cases, let's say for example you want to project it perpendicular to each of the surface, you just simply connect the normals. So if you connect the normals, so let's give normal some directional factor, amplitude. So let's say 5. You see here it is actually going reverse. So let's put a negative factor. See, now it is actually each of the square is being projecting 5 units to the normal vector. Okay, let's keep it to vertical projection z vector. Maybe let's make it to 75 and then increase it higher. See, it has created a bunch of blocks by a topographic model. So it has created this bunch of blocks. Now if you go ahead and change the subdivision, it will automatically change. So let's say if you make it to 7 or you make it to 8, so it creates this. So if you put 3, so you can actually take any surface and subdivide them, and if the surface is basically a curvilinear topographic surface, if the surface is very curvy and all that, you can actually evaluate the surface and project it from there. Okay, now actually we can do random reduce. For example, if you want to randomly reduce something, so you just feed in random reduce component, get the geometry from here. Geometry is basically the squares, and number of numbers to be reduced. So let's say 20 numbers to be reduced. Okay, basically, and then feed this into an extrusion. See, so if you increase or decrease, so it will automatically randomly reduce, but all of them are going to the same height of 60 unit as the z vector. See, it is basically a variation. So it keeps the same 11 number of points to be number of squares to be reduced. You see, so it gives you a couple of variations. So for example, if you have a big master plan where you want to study this, you can actually do this if all of them are of the same height. Now we can do another thing actually. Let's pick the area of this, okay, which is the center point. So we pick the center point. Let's give the number, let's say point list, and the size is let's say 5 or whatever. So each of the square is numbered actually. It's starting from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if you want to rearrange the orders, we can rearrange that through data structure, but I'm not getting into that now. So it at least has the numbers for each squares. So now let's go ahead and create the list item. Feed the list from this geometry. Okay, items to be, so by default it is taking the 0. So if you give panel inputs, for example, let's say 0, and I want to select, let's say 35, 29, 32, 36, 32, again I'm putting 32, 21. So if I do that, let's multi-line data. So now let's copy this. So now if you feed this here, it projects now if you look at this, it has actually projected only those squares to 60 units. So now if you select all of them, copy it, now you feed in another number here. For example, let's say 13, 7, 19, 5, 11, whatever number is 17. So let's say these are plot numbers, for example. So all of those blocks will be projected to 40 units. So you can actually create very interesting this thing. So now let's say another one, 15, 14 and 20, let's select. So copy it. Okay. Now let's feed in here 15, 14 and 20, and let's increase the height to be, let's say 90 units. See, so it is very useful. I mean, I think so. If you play around, feed the numbers, specific numbers, whatever you want to see, you know, kind of openness and closeness and all that, so you can actually do through so this could be kind of a massing study for city blocks. So you can study different variations, different heights and so on. Okay, that's it for now. I hope this was very helpful. If you like this video, I would appreciate if you give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. That would give me a motivation to do more videos. And if you specifically want to know any trick, kindly do let me know in the comments below. I will try my best to make a video. Thanks for watching.